And we record these so that folks that can't be with us in the session can watch these from the comfort of their home. And if you're in this session, you'll get an email from our newsletter list with a link to that recording, so you'll be able to watch that. And that's good for, I think, about 3 months that you can access that recording. Then it goes offline and we take it and put captions on it and make sure that it's accessible for folks. We share those on a sliding scale donation basis. So, all right, let's kick ourselves off. Welcome to the first Queen School Online of 2023. My name is Ange, and this is Bee, as we already said. And where they keep bees. They Keep Bees started in 2019 when I brought, or actually it was fall of 2018. I brought about 35 of my hives south for the winter. And then in the spring of 2019, came back down to the south and began working those hives and selling nucleus hives. We've since expanded into selling queens, beeswax, propolis, and honey. And we've grown pretty rapidly from those 35 hives to about 300 hives that we manage annually. We have hives in a couple places. And Bee is going to kick us off by telling us a little bit about They Keep Bees and about our migratory practices and what we do.
All right. So we have essentially currently two posts that we work out of. We have a southern outpost and a northern outpost. And our southern outpost is concentrated in Florida, eastern central coast of Florida. And this is a great shot of us loading things up from Florida to head north. And as you may know, if you've ever moved bees, it's best to do it at night. So believe it or not, this is actually a night shot. And that's the moon out in the background there. Beautiful photo we got. And this is one of our mating yards up north. And we mostly concentrate our yards in Western Massachusetts, with a couple yards up in Vermont, as well as, dispersed in the Western Mass region. We tend to fill these mating yards to the brim when we're in the midst of our queen rearing time. We really try to, take full advantage of that northern season, which is short, as you may know, if you're up that way. Okay, and next up, we've got a quick glance at a queen rearing calendar. And this is a guide that we created to give you a step-by-step look at the entire process. So from start to finish, and there's several steps that you'll be seeing us discuss today, which includes building a cell raiser, grafting, creating mating nooks, moving capped queen cells from cell raisers to nooks, and checking on your mated queens. Oh, and also, if you like this resource, we do have paper copies of these as well. Here's one of our gorgeous queens, which is produced in one of our mating yards, and we work primarily with Carniolan Spartan line, as well as pole line queens. And as beekeepers that raise queens, we are constantly mimicking the swarm process of bees. So here's a nice clip of a swarm that we found out in the wild. And so we let the hives grow to that point just before they're ready to swarm, and then we split them to create space and an opportunity to expand. And this starts the process all over again, while providing us an opportunity to introduce our grafted larvae into the splits and allow them to raise new queens. And one of our methods of catching queens includes smoking and drumming the bees. This is particularly important when we're using hives that are large or honey bound or cross-combed or otherwise just difficult to manage. And this is a quick little video of Ange demonstrating that technique. And hopefully you have sound.
No, there's no sound, but I can walk us through it. So basically I create a gap at the bottom. There's an air gap there between the bottom board and the bottom box. And then we either smoke.
That enters light.
Exactly,
Yeah.
thank you. We either smoke or drum those hives up. And then here I'm actually taking the top off because I forgot to do that. And I'm adding a top box that is empty.
One of the reasons not only is to enter smoke into that bottom area, but also to create light for those bees to run away from the light. They have a tendency to prefer darkness. So if you introduce that light, they're going to run away from it, and thus they're going to run up toward the top of the hive.
Exactly. And the goal is to get the queen running, because then all the bees are going to follow her, or the nurse bees will follow her. Most of the forager bees are up in the air. So that box is sealed. We put a top on it, and then we continue to smoke or drum to allow those bees to run up. And this is a great way to split up our very large comfort hives, which we tend to winter them 3 or 4 boxes deep, and then work them in this way to split them up at the beginning of the season.
I will say it is a little difficult when they're particularly honeybound. It is hard to get them to run up beyond those honeycombs up top.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to get kind of caught below the honey. So that is something to consider.
All right. So from that drum.
So this is the after. That was the before, and this is the after. So up that top box, they've all run up into that box, and hopefully the queen is up there as well. And so this is just a little, documentation of Ange looking and spotting that queen in the box. And this is a great way to easily catch queens without disturbing the comb. And here's Ange demonstrating catching the queen from the box, which is, it's a process. It's hard to see in the beginning, and then as you practice it, you get better and better at spotting her within that whole mass of bees.
Makes your eyes strong.
All right, and this is a great example of a before and after of making a split. So the hive on the left, as you can see, desperately needs to be split due to space constraints. And the hive on the right is what it will look like after the split is created. I will say that this split is definitely small on both bees and resource. I would probably want to put another frame of brood in there and shake some more bees in. But a split of this size on the right here, we would also drop in a 10-day queen cell into that and be confident that they would be able to, finish that cell off. The queen would emerge, and that she would be ready to mate from there. And here you've got the cells that would be placed into those splits, and here's what those cells look like. And you may be wondering where those cells are going to come from. So after you've got a successful round of cells, well, first off, you're building a cell raiser, right? And so before you place those cells into mating nooks, you've got to have these cell raisers built. And the cell raisers are the heart of the queen rearing operation. They require a substantial amount of resources, including a high density of nurse bees, nectar, pollen, capped brood. And for us, our recipe is to have 2 frames of pollen on either side of those cells, of those grafted cells, and then 4 frames of nectar on either end of the box, so on the farthest ends of the box. And the remaining space is going to be capped brood. We never put open brood in our cell raisers, just for the safety of ensuring that there's no eggs that we may have missed, because you don't want to have the competition of possibly another cell being drawn. And therefore, our cells are also often queenless. You can build queen-right cell raisers. We just generally don't do it. We graft from 24 to 48 hour age larvae, and that is basically the second row up from the bottom. They're really hard to see, and that's kind of the idea. And they're going to be swimming in a pool of royal jelly if they're well fed, and that's what you want. So it's one of the things that I was taught when learning to graft was you always want to graft what you can't see. So you just have to hope that you're picking up some larva and it's swimming in that jelly. And here's a nice shot of a student that has grafted a larva and is inspecting it. That's a nice photo from Queen's School this year. And after a successful emergence and the mating flight, a mated queen is in each of our mating nooks, hopefully, and ready to be caught and start the cycle all over again. And here's Ange catching a queen off a bustling frame of bees.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Bee.
Yeah.
I'm going to kick us off with talking a little bit about, well, actually, first I'm going to talk about our Adaptive Bee Breeding Alliance. There is a group of us who, in April of 2021, convened under the guidance of Melanie Kirby from Zia Queen Bees, a nectar nomad in New Mexico. And Melanie convened us all to share about our practices in queen rearing and strategies and some research that was happening. And she called us the Adaptive Bee Breeding Alliance. And this has since grown into a collaborative network where we are going to be learning how to instrumentally inseminate, learning how to collect drone semen, and being able to share and preserve that semen amongst all of the beekeepers in the network, and eventually with beekeepers across the nation. So this is just a snapshot of some of those folks. But this is around the time that we started calling our queens adaptive. And I wanted to talk a little about like what adaptive means and what we're thinking about when we're using that language. So the definition of adaptive is becoming adjusted to new conditions, or a change or process of changing by which an organism becomes better suited to its environment. We all know that Varroa mites have been an incredible challenge for bees and their keepers in the United States and across the world. And we also mostly know and accept that the climate is shifting and that we need to be responsive to those shifts and have our practices as beekeepers be responsive to those shifts. We're seeing changes in nectar production. We're seeing changes in pollen production. We're seeing changes in bee health that are being influenced by both of these things. So we started using this language adaptive to refer to bees that we are selecting for Varroa sensitivity, but also bees that were showing a real virulence and longevity in surviving across the 2 bioregions where we keep bees successfully. Ooh. Oh, I already talked about the mites, but here's their mite life cycle. So Bee already talked about how at They Keep Bees we raise queens, but I wanted to talk a little bit about some research that we've done over the last couple of years in queen rearing and queen production, and what the results of that have been. In 2020, we, along with collaborator Sam Comfort from Anarchy Apiaries, were funded by the USDA program Northeast SARE, which is Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. What they do is they fund small-scale farm and agricultural projects and apicultural projects to do field-based research to innovate within their particular agricultural field. And what we wanted to do when we first started this research was trial 3 different ways of rearing queens that we had been practicing in our apiaries and saw some promises for. The first thing that we did was trial our 10-day cells to prove that we could raise high-quality queens in comfort hives with those cells. And then we trialed something called 2-day or 48-hour cells, which are larvae that are grafted, and then instead of being placed in the cell raiser for 10 days, they're only placed in the cell raiser for 48 hours. And this very rapid feeding of royal jelly happens and your larva begins to grow, but then is easily transported across great distances. This is good for rural beekeepers who have outyards very far away. It's good for folks who want to trade mother genetics because you can actually ship these just like with a wet paper towel, and they can arrive alive more reliably than at the time for us 10-day cells could. And then the other thing that we trialed was walkaway splits. On our website, which I'll link at the end, we have all of these really beautiful pieces of material that we were able to make from that data, including a how-to guide that shows you how to raise your own 10-day and 2-day cells, the results of some of our walkaway split data, and a recipe for what we call the runaway split, a really fast, easy way to make a walkaway split. And doing all of these, we were able to raise really high quality queens. So I want to talk just briefly about the methods in that. And then we'll go into talking a little bit about the queen school that resulted from that. So as I said, there were 3 methods of queen production that we trialed: 10-day, 2-day, and walkaway splits. And we used both field and lab data to evaluate what makes a queen of quote unquote high quality. There's a question I get a lot. What do you mean high quality queen? What I mean is that she's successfully mated and that her morphological features, meaning her weight and size, are above average. And then her insemination features, meaning the amount and the viability of the sperm stored in her spermatheca, is considered high. The lab data that we collected was evaluated by the Tarpey lab at North Carolina State University, run by Dr. David Tarpey. And that lab is open to receiving queens for sampling from everyone from backyard beekeepers all the way up through commercial beekeepers. They receive your queens, they freeze them, and then they dissect them and evaluate all the different components, including both the weight and the size and those insemination features. Why would you want to do that? To know what the quality of the queens that you are rearing in your own operation is. And also to understand how viable the sperm is for the drones that those queens are mating with. I'm sure a lot of you know that we've had a lot of issue in the US with drone viability, and there are more and more studies showing that drone viability continues to decline, and that's actually resulting in queen failure more than the actual queen or mother genetics themselves. Talked about queen quality already. Whoops. This is a really great graph that shows the different methods and the steps for each method. So in the 10-day cells, as Bea described, you're going to make your cell raiser, graft into it, and then you're going to have your cells in that cell raiser for 10 days before you move them over to your mating nooks and allow them to mate and successfully begin laying eggs. 3 weeks later, you then catch that queen. In the 2 days method, we're removing the cell at 48 hours. And we are putting that into the mating nook and allowing them to complete the cell. So they become the finisher. And then 4 weeks later, you'll have your queen, right? Because you need that additional 8 days for them to draw and cap and complete the cell. And then we have the walkaway split, in which case you don't need any cell raiser. You just take a nice strong hive. You pull the queen out with a few frames of eggs. You put them in a new location, and the original location you allow to raise up their queen. They have an abundance of resources, plus all the forager bees that are coming back to that hive. And about a month and a few days later, you have a high quality queen, ideally, if your walkaway split is successful. Okay, so let's get into the results of that study. What was fascinating and exciting to us is that across both field and lab data, there was no statistically significant difference between the queens that we were able to raise using 10-day cells, 2-day cells, and walkaway splits. You can see from this first chart here, the percent of queen survival, which literally means how many queens went out, mated, and made it back to the box and didn't get eaten by a bird or picked off by a dragonfly or crash in the grass and never return. And across those, we saw 68% of the 10-day cells that were successful, 68% of the 2-day cells, and 66, slightly lower but not significantly lower, of the walkaway splits were successful. The next thing that we looked at was population density. We were concerned with walkaway splits that if we made several walkaway splits throughout the season in May, June, and July, that we would see a big decline in the population density in those hives. And so that might not be a viable method for raising queens throughout the season and may only be a viable method for raising queens in the spring. But what we found is, again, there was no significant difference between the methods. We saw a slightly lower population density in the walkaway splits, but nothing that couldn't be fed and brought back up to a reasonable population to go into the winter when preparing winter bees. With the lab data and our averaging of the morphological grade, we saw no difference between the methods, meaning when those queens were dissected and evaluated, they were about the same size, they weighed about the same, their legs, their heads, their spermatheca, their abdomen, their thorax, all were within the same range and size. Why does size matter with queens? We could probably have an entire conversation about that. But the theory is that when a queen is larger, she has had more nutritional density throughout her development. So she's been successfully tended to by the cell raiser or the nurse bees in the walkaway split. And again, no significant difference in all three methods in the size of our queens and above average morphological grade for all three methods. And mating characteristics are literally how much sperm or drone semen is in her spermatheca. Again, no significant difference in those insemination grades. So that's exciting to us because we realized that we could use all three of these methods effectively in our apiaries within the parameters of our current practice and raise high quality queens. But it's also exciting because it meant that we could be teaching methods to other people. We went and then did a deeper dive into walkaway splits. We got a second grant, also from Northeast SARE, and we looked at what we worked with Sam Comfort. We made about 400 walkaway splits. We evaluated all of those walkaway splits, looking at their population density, their mating success based on the comb age, their mating success based on the brood age, and their mating split success. And in all of those methods, we were able to raise high quality queens, in all of those data points, we were able to see above average results. And we were able to hone down a walkaway split recipe. We continue at Vacey Bees to test and trial this recipe, and we love to hear from other folks that have tested and trialed this recipe. I think something that makes it successful for us is always leaving the walkaway split with no queen in the original location where the mother hive was, so that it gets that abundance of forager bees that return on top of the nurse bees that it has. Again, this is another set of materials that's available on our website, and I'll link that at the end of our presentation. But essentially what our recipe is that you remove the mother hive. So you pick it up, put it in a new location. It could be in the same yard, turned 180 degrees, or it could be on a new pallet. Then you put a box in the original location, and you return a comb of larvae with the adhering bees and no queen, and a comb of nectar and pollen with the adhering bees and no queen. The idea is then that all of the forager bees return to that hive, and with just those two combs, they can successfully raise their own queen and be split again 4 weeks later. This is the SARE research paper titles, in case folks want to do a deep dive into reading about the methods and practices from both and findings from both research studies. Northeast SARE and SARE across the United States has a free database of every study that's been conducted and funded by them. And you get all of the resources as well, hyperlinked here. So the first one was called Identifying the Most Effective and Accessible Queen Rearing Methods to Strengthen Northeast Beekeeping. And the second was called Testing Darwinian Honeybee Breeding Protocols for Mass Replication. I link those at the end too, so you didn't have to write those two titles down. So we did all this research. Obviously, it influenced our practice, but this was as we're cusping 2020 and going into 2021, we really wanted to be able to share this more authentically, because we had been doing this research sort of as a think tank of beekeepers and not able to meet and collaborate and talk to students and researchers. And so we kicked off something called Queen School. You're a part of it right now. We have online classes that happen once a month through the winter months. And then we have a hands-on version of our school. And I think B is going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So as Ange mentioned, this past summer, we hosted our first hands-on Queen School program. And that was thanks to a SARE grant that we received to do this programming. And attending students were given the opportunity to learn how to make all of those splits we referenced. So we made walkaway splits to start. We did 2-day cells and we did 10-day cells, all as split opportunities. They learned multiple recipes for creating both queenless and queen right cell raisers. They practiced grafting on 2 separate weekends. And they had the opportunity to learn from 6 different queen rearing beekeepers from across the whole continent. Feedback from students was really strong and encouraging as we move forward with planning this year's program for hands-on Queen School. And we're super excited to move forward with this year's program. We also did a brief data set collected from this year's hands-on group. We don't have it published quite yet, but basically we were, again, looking at the viability of walkaway 2-day and 10-day splits and what was viable in relation to the population density. And the data more or less indicated that, according to our observations, that the walkaway splits were most successful and contained denser hive populations than the splits that were made by both 10 and 2-day cells. And so for me, I'm hypothesizing that maybe the bees are just deciding to drift to the bee's choice location, as opposed to the ones that we introduce. But what is really nice to know for us is that we're really happy to know that the method that requires the least technical skill is demonstrated to be a viable option for beekeepers to successfully make splits and be able to expand your apiaries. So very exciting, and we love to see that.
Exactly. Yeah, and Queen School was a really, we offered these online classes all through the winter of last year, so January to April. This year, we're abbreviating that a little bit. We're going to be going from February to April, so we'll have 3 total classes. Our first class is right here, right now. Our next class will be March 15th, and we'll feature 2 Canadian beekeepers that actually collaborate on queen production and nucleus production in their apiaries. And then we will have Tuckabee in April talking about sustainable queen rearing in her practice. What was important for us was to be able to take the methods that we researched and then initiated in our own apiaries and teach them in a hands-on way in a collaborative apiary. So the folks that you see in these images actually got to manage these hives from start to finish. Starting in the beginning of May, we managed an apiary of about 50 hives together. We caught the queens together. We evaluated what made a good mating nook split. We made those first walkaway splits as a group. And then at the second meeting, we learned how to graft. We placed 10-day cells that I made for that first one into the mating nooks. And then we came back together a third time to graft again, place 48-hour or 2-day cells, and then collect the data from that and finish up our season together. And throughout this program, folks were able to take queens home to their own apiaries. They were able to get live feedback from the 6 instructors that were a part of these sessions. And they were able to sort of be met where they were with the different instructors who were teaching. And we had Melanie Kirby teaching about queen right versus queenless cell raisers and the benefits of each. We had Taka Seville guesting in the Mating Nook apiary to help people evaluate the population density of these little mating nooks. Because if you are coming from a Langstroth background and you're entering into a Ware or comfort model mating nook, it's really hard to ascertain what is the appropriate population density of this hive. Is it big enough? Is it too small? Will it make it the 3 to 4 weeks between classes that is necessary? Or will all the bees just drift away? As we move forward, our intentions are to offer hands-on Queen School in an abbreviated format. We got a lot of feedback from folks that attended these online classes that they really wanted to come, but 4 sessions in the summer was a little bit too much. So we're going to be offering 3 sessions. 2 of those sessions will be about queen rearing and production in the 10-day and 2-day model, as well as walkaway splits. And then our 3rd session will actually be an advanced session with beekeepers from the Adaptive Bee Breeders Alliance, where we will learn about instrumental insemination, as well as drone congregation areas. Drone congregation areas are very cool. I'm so excited to get our own mapped. We're going to be learning from Julia Mahood about where your drone congregation area is, how to find it, and how to map it so that you can successfully map the drone congregations where you are. Why would that matter as a beekeeper? For us, we really want to know, are we saturating the drone pool where we are? Are we consistently saturating with our Varroa sensitive hygienic bees, or are we getting contaminated is not the right word. Is it getting flooded with other drones, and how do we respond to that as a small scale apiary, right? Does that mean we have to move our entire mating nook population to a different yard for mating? And then for us up in the north, we have 6 mating yards in the Northeast in our operation. And so I want to be able to map. They're all within about 2.5 miles of each other, but I want to be able to map each of those and understand what the congregation areas are and what the overlap is, so we can continue to have our apiary thrive and see the benefits of that as we move forward. So a lot of great content that's going to be happening in person, and some engaging content that's going to be happening online. You don't have to have any previous experience with queen rearing to come to any of these sessions. But it is helpful if you have some queen work experience to come to the hands-on sessions. And I do just want to touch on a couple of things. We will open hands-on enrollment next month in March. So when we start class, we will have live enrollment for the Queen School hands-on sessions, meaning that you can start applying to be in one of those cohorts. And we will have these sessions monthly. So it'll be the 2nd week of the month. So right now, February 15th, we'll do another March 15th and another April 17th. Just to make sure that we have consistency, they'll all be happening at the same time, and they all will be recorded and sent out to you as a participant in the follow-up sessions. Something that I do recommend is, if you haven't already, make sure that our email, info@theykeepbees.com, is marked as not spam in your inbox, so we can send you those links. We are sending those links to over 1,000 people that have signed up for online Queen School since last year. And so it's really easy to lose. Or have that get marked as junk, right? Because we're sending out bulk emails, and sometimes your email server will mark that as a junk email. So if you want our links, if you want access to these Zooms, make sure that you have marked us as a safe and generative person in your inbox. Okay. I think I'm going to pause my share here, and I'm going to move into the chat. So at this point, I want to share a couple of links with y'all. The first is where you can find out about upcoming Queen School classes, and that includes the online classes and the in-person. The next, as promised, are the 2 research papers that we published from Northeast SARE. And then our newsletter and Instagram are going to be here. And our shop where you can order bees and wax and honey and all of that good juicy stuff.
Queens.
It's going to be here. Yeah, our next Queen Catch is February 27th, shipping February 28th. So if you're in the Southeast and you're interested in Queens, I think we have maybe 15 to 20 left in that catch before we're totally sold out. And then you can check out our website for
Or out west.
True. And you can check out our website for additional catch dates. We'll have some in March, in April, but April might be sold out already. And then all through the summer up north. Okay, so I really want to leave robust time for questions, but because this is a grant-funded opportunity, I also need you to fill out a little evaluation for me. So we're gonna pause right now. And I'm going to ask you to fill out this evaluation. It's a Google form. You click on this link, it will take you to the form. It's about 6 questions, shouldn't take you any more than 3 to 5 minutes. And while we do that, I am going to drink some water and hang out in the chat. So if you have questions that you want to place in the chat that we can answer, now would be a great time to do that. If you jotted those down, if you've got a burning question, if you want to ask about what we do and how we do it, some result of the research, do a deeper dive into something about population density or wax production, right here and right now is a great spot for that.
But also fill the evaluation out. Just to reiterate, that's great information for us. It gives us a lot of good feedback about how we're doing, what you learned, what you would like to know more about, etc. So please take a moment. It would be much appreciated.
All right, folks. So if you've got questions, we can do one of 2 things. You can drop them in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and I will keep an eye out here and unmute you, so you can ask any burning questions.
We've never done that in the past.
No.
This is a new territory.
All right. Can I show you Elena Saporta is asking if I can show you a graphic of queen bee anatomy. I don't have a graphic of queen bee anatomy in my slide deck, so I can't show that to you.
I bet Google's got something
off the cuff. Yeah. Do you have a specific question about queen bee anatomy? I could probably answer it.
But I will bet that, if you Google queen bee anatomy, it might pop up.
All right, Colleen from Catskills. Hey, Colleen. Great. So in-person classes, we have there's an application. Sorry, Colleen is asking, or is assuming that in-person classes fill up quickly. So what's the best way to get a spot? So we're going to have an application process for in-person classes. And what that means is that we'll have a form, much like the Google form that you are hopefully looking at right now for evaluations. And you'll fill that form out. And then we work with a small team of volunteers to evaluate those applications and select a cohort of beekeepers to come into those classes. The classes are offered as sliding scale, which means that it's a pay what you can model. So it's really not about like what you can pay. It's about what experience you have. And how this learning about queen production and queen rearing will benefit your apiary as well as your community of beekeepers that you come from. It's a big priority of ours and the Northeast SARE funders that we're skilling up or teaching beekeepers who are going to use these skills to raise their own queens or to raise queens in a collaborative, or to move forward with running a small business raising queens. So best way to get a spot is to keep an eye out for our newsletter, and to apply early so that we get your application in and can review it in that March and April window. Yeah, you bet. Thanks for asking, Colleen. Okay, other questions. Again, if you raise your hand, I'm just going to go through the many pages, so it may take me a minute to
I think it'll give you a notice.
get to you.
Oh, here we go. Why is it that Melissa is asking, why is it that drones have lost vitality over time and continue to do so apparently? What is the knowledge based on and how detailed is it? That's a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do we want to answer that?
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that nutrition in its entirety has diminished over the course of our lifetime. Nutrition in terms of, not only soil nutrition, but therefore many different components of life. There's data out there about how nutrition is a point of loss throughout the ecosystem, and we also we've seen that in goldenrod forage. We've seen the nutrition of goldenrod go down since we've started keeping bees. That it's becoming less and less productive
In the Northeast region specifically.
in our region. We haven't looked specifically at the nutrition of drones, but that would be a good study to look at.
Yeah, so there's a couple of studies I'm going to link here. One is about the Ligustica bees. I think it was conducted in Italy, but don't quote me on that. Another is the finding about systemic insecticides impacting drone sperm production. I'll link that one. I don't have, it's a Nature article. So we're not just saying that off the cuff, Melissa. It's something that's being researched, and the research is being published by academics. So that's where the knowledge base is coming from. How detailed and how affirmative is the linkage or causation versus correlation? I can't say for certain because I'm not an academic. I'm a beekeeper, but I do know that it's being talked about more and more, and there's a growing concern that drone vitality is in a decline, and thus queen viability, well-mated queen viability is also in a decline. Okay, Peter O'Donnell mentioned AIB Queen School. So I'm not quite sure what this not quite sure what the question is, but there will be an II or instrumental insemination demonstration at the advanced session of Queen School. So we're going to have a 2-part intermediate beekeeping course, and then we are going to have a 1-part 2-day advanced course. That course is going to feature an instrumental insemination demonstration as well as a demo on working with and banking virgins. That's going to be by Megan Mahoney from Honey Queen Bees out in Texas and North Dakota. So she won't be teaching a hands-on II instrumental insemination class, but she will be demoing that. And we are working with Megan and Melanie and our Adaptive Bee Breeders Alliance to vision into what it looks like to have more hands-on learning in that realm. But for now, it'll just be a demo to get people's feet wet in what that process even is and looks like. Kara, thank you. We are very efficient.
Just a note, AI Queen School will be offered in 2050.
2050?
So, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Deb is asking, is it critical to find the queen when doing the runaway or walkaway split method? It does not work if the old queen is left in the original location. Then you just have the same hive with the same old queen. They won't replace the queen and you won't have a split. So certainly you could pull a walkaway split from your original hive and make put a walkway split in a new location, but we don't find that they raise as high quality of a queen, as large, or as effective, because you get a lot of drift back to that original location. So our method is to split the old queen away from the original location, leave the original location queenless, and have them raise a queen, and also have them have the returning field force, or all of the foraging bees, because those bees then feed and care for the hive as it's going through its transition of raising a queen. So you have a hive that is nutritionally dense instead of nutritionally deficient, and that is the hive that you really want raising a queen, especially in that early part of the season when they're bringing in a lot of pollen. So that's our method. I think there are hundreds, if not thousands, of ways to make successful walkaway splits.
I will say that I think Deb's method would work if you are removing that hive from the yard.
Yeah.
So if you are bringing that split to a whole other yard that's miles away, then that's okay. But if you're keeping it in yard, you're going to get drift back to the original location, and whatever you split away from that original location is not going to stay there, in our experience.
Yeah. Okay, Barbara is asking, if using a Langstroth hive, would you recommend a 5-frame nook for the split? So if I'm making a split with a 10-frame Langstroth box, I would take 5 frames with the original queen and put them in a 5-frame box. And then I would leave the 10-frame with new frames in it in that original location as mentioned before. So it would work the same whether you're using a comfort hive, top bar hive, or a Langstroth hive. You want to have the smaller hive moved away with the original queen, and then you have the hive that's raising its own queen in the original location. Have that be a little bit more robust, because again, they have that full forage force. They're going to be returning. They're going to be continuing to expand, at least, if not in brood, at least in the resources that they continue to collect over the 4 weeks that it takes for you to have a viable queen in that box.
Also, can't stress enough that the situation, what time of year we're talking about, what kind of flow is on, is essential to answering these questions. So, you know, the amount of resource that you are providing to that split is really dependent on what's going on at that time of year in your region.
Okay, Jordy, can you clarify for me what
cell building.
Cell builder colonies? Yeah. Can you give, so Jordy is asking, can you give some specifics about building cell builder colonies? So I think Bea mentioned this, but usually what we like to do is to take, we work with Langs or Langstroth hives when we're making cell builder colonies, because we prefer the density of bees, and we're often grafting a lot of larvae, and we want them, as many of those, to be successful as possible in a single cell builder. So we'll often work with a double Lang, so 2 10-frame boxes. And what we're doing in those 2 boxes is we are going to put the larva in the very middle. We're going to put pollen frames on either side of where we have that graftable larva. And then on the outer edges, we're going to go 4 frames of nectar. We do nectar, not honey, because nectar is the food for those nurse bees, and they're going to need to be able to digest that and make food for your queens, mix it, and use that pollen to feed your queens, right? So you're thinking about the nutrition of not just your queens who need the pollen, but also the nurse bees that need to be able to live and care for those queens over the 10-day period. Whatever is left, whether we're doing 2 bars or 1 bar of graftable larva, we will fill with capped brood. And then we are taking that entire additional box of bees and shaking it into the bottom box of the Lang. So we're taking 2 boxes of bees and putting all of them down into 1. And then we're condensing that hive to be 2 frames of pollen, 4 frames of nectar, and then the remaining 3 frames, usually for us, are going to be capped brood. We don't ever put, as Bea said, Open brood in our cell raisers, there are many beekeepers who do. We've just had enough catastrophes with open brood in our cell raisers and headaches that we prefer not to do that in our situation. And when you're working with 2 boxes in a Langstroth setup, you often have enough capped brood that you can be selective and call out the stuff that you don't need.
Also, one thing to add is that you do want to make sure that all of those bees that you're adding in are nurse bees. Those bees will help you raise those cells. Mm-hmm. Foragers are not going to do that work necessarily. Nurse bees will.
The foragers will feed your cell builder, but that's what they're going to be doing. You really want young nurse bees to raise their larvae. Okay, Bill Flynn, how do you find your drone congregation area? That's a great question, Bill.
We don't know.
Julia Mahood is going to teach us this summer how to find the drone congregation area, but she uses mapping, GIS mapping. That she has a system for using GIS mapping, and she also uses drones, not drone bees, but drone cameras, flying them up in the air to locate possible drone congregation areas. So she'll take the GIS maps of where all our bees are, evaluate those, make a hypothesis about where the drone congregation areas are, and then fly a drone camera up into the air to actually check and see if that hypothesis is true or not.
I can't wait.
It's very exciting. Brian White is asking, when we are in Massachusetts, when do we typically begin grafting? We usually do our first graft mid to late May. We have a transition where we are coming from the south and heading north. And so we have to drop bees, get a graft in, prepare our cell builders, get a graft in, and then catch queens for a package run that we do. So usually it's the middle of May, but as anyone who lives in the Northeast knows, it's all dependent on what the weather wants to do. Some years it's the middle, some years it's the 3rd, some years it's the 15th of May, some years it's the 21st of May. And we're really playing against what the needs of our bees are and what the weather is. If they can't forage, it's really hard to push them to to make cell builders. If it's too cold, then our cells are all going to probably fail or get torn down anyway. So we try to be really careful about when we graft so that we can be as successful as possible. But usually mid-May, definitely by early June, you can get lots of good grafts in Western Massachusetts at least. If you're in Eastern Mass, you're actually maybe 2 weeks ahead of us. Is that right? Like 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks ahead of us. So you've got a bit of a jump on us as far as grafting. You might be able to do it in early May. All right, Tim Dutcher. Hey, Tim, welcome back. Curious about the dimensions of the comfort hive. So
those are 12 by 12, which means that they're going to be, well, and they're rough cut lumber. So they're 1 inch thick. And those are rough dimensions. They're not like lumber dimensions. So, well, they're technically 1 by 6, and then they're, cut in 12-inch chunks. So you've got 11 inches on the inside all the way around, and it's just a 12 by 12 square. So they're quite simple, and then just drill a hole in each side and you're good to go. Asking about sharing the PowerPoint.
We will share the recording. I will share the PowerPoint if I can get it into a PDF version. The actual, this actual PowerPoint is quite large because of all the videos. But yeah, I'll try to. Also,
the study data is out there elsewhere. So perhaps, I'm not sure what part they're interested in, but.
Yeah, I'll work on that. I'm sure I could probably figure out how to get it into a PDF. Allah, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, is asking, do you feed the hive with the old queen? So when we make a walkway split, yeah, I would feed the old hive because you're actually taking their whole forage force. And so you would want to feed them a 1-to-1 syrup because they're going to lose so much of that.
It certainly wouldn't hurt.
Right. We also like to do a thing where we don't give our queen right old splits any capped brood if we can help it. And so I would feed her because they're not even going to have emerging capped brood for several weeks. So they do need that feed.
Yeah, you're knocking them back substantially.
Okay, Amber is asking, does the queen that was moved in a walkway split still take flight with a swarm, or does moving her prevent that? So when you make a walkway split, she isn't going to take off in a swarm unless you've already got swarm cells and you happen to miss a swarm cell. So there's always a caveat.
Our goal is to avoid the swarm opportunity for them. So you're getting in there just prior to them moving into that swarm tendency. So like Andrew's saying, if you miss it, then you may have that situation.
Yeah, there's always an asterisk with bees, right? There's always something you could have missed. Jess is asking, have you ever observed any of your northern hives keep drones through the winter?
Oh.
No, a handful of times in really mild winters, I've seen bees raise brood all the way into October and overwinter with drawing wax and overwinter with some drones. So it is possible. It could indicate a really strong flow throughout the season. The time that I'm thinking about was actually, I think, 2018 to 2019. We had a really good nectar flow, 2018, going into the fall. And so we actually saw brood being reared and wax being drawn all the way into October because we had a nonstop flow from May all the way to the beginning of October. So it's fairly rare, but I would assume it indicates like a really high propensity for nutrition.
Mm-hmm. Thank yous.
Okay, so Lee is asking, what are your thoughts on treating splits for brood breaks with OAV for mite management? I have a couple of thoughts about OAV. I think that OAV means oxalic acid vapor, just in case folks are not familiar with that. We use oxalic and formic acid in our mite management in our production colonies, or our large and our drone producing colonies. I don't use the vapor at the moment. If you do use the vapor, please read all instructions for keeping yourself safe. Oxalic acid can literally burn holes in your lungs. So
in vapor form.
Yeah, when it's vaporized, not when it's liquid. So that's my first thing. I think so. A lot of folks are I think Megan Mahoney does this, where they right after the queen is caught out of a mating nook split, they actually do an oxalic acid treatment immediately afterwards. So the hive has had both an oxalic or both a brood break and an oxalic acid treatment. And I think if I was going to apply oxalic vapor, I would go with that method because it proves really, it probably cleans the brood the most, right? Because you have a 2-week break in the period between when the last of that brood emerged and that queen is going to be completely mated and laying new eggs and have capped brood again. If you make a walkway split, it's more like a 3-week break, which is great. Or if you use a 2-day cell, it's a 3-week break. So you've got that break of brood, which means there's no new mites being raised. And then you treat with the OAV, which means that you're knocking all the phoretic or attached to the body mites off of the bees. So it's probably the way to get the cleanest brood and a good starter for evaluating the Varroa sensitive hygienics of the bees that you are producing. Elena is asking, do all of our bees go south for the winter? No, we keep a certain number of hives up in the north. I think we have about 40 overwintering up there right now, and they become the stock for the following year's queen production. So whoever survives the winter becomes what we select from looking at how sensitive are they to or how much uncapping behavior do they have? How many mites do they have in the brood nest? What's their longevity? Meaning, are they a 1 or a 2-year-old queen? And we use that to select for our breeder queens for the north. So not all of them, but many of our hives come south for the winter. Anthony is asking, do we ever encounter any issues with bringing bees from Florida to the north and have Africanized bees or traits? Not that we've noticed, and we do get inspected out of Florida and into Massachusetts. We get our bees tested. They take samples of our brood, our bees, every year to make sure that we aren't transmitting any traits or any disease. And we've never come back with anything positive for quote unquote Africanized bees or traits. I do find the bees in Florida to be inherently more defensive and a little bit more hygienic, honestly. But I don't have an issue with them being particularly virulent. My experience in Florida is that bees that have a very high mite load are very defensive, or bees that have a very high hive beetle load are also very defensive. So,
but same up north. Any hive that is struggling with mites is going to present in that way.
yeah. Yeah, but it's something we're really careful about. We are very selective about our stock. If we come across defensive hives down here, we eliminate the queen and requeen as soon as possible because we don't want to take any of those risks.
We've only done that a handful of times, less than you can count on one hand. So
yeah, definitely.
we're fortunate with that.
Does happen.
Yeah. Hi, Tina.
Hey, Tina. Tina is asking if we ever retire our queens and or how old our queens get in our Massachusetts yards. Gosh, last year, how old? We had a 5-year-old queen last year that we brought down to Florida and grafted off of a couple more times. She was probably the oldest. I think I had a 4-year-old queen before that. I've definitely had a good number of 3-year-old queens. But 5 is probably the longest. And as she was sort of winding down, we kept her in a smaller and smaller hive so that she wouldn't have to lay quite as many eggs or work as hard to keep things going. That's what we like to do with our smaller. That's
their retirement plan.
Right. Our queens who are in it for the long haul, we'll keep them in a smaller hive so we can continue to graft from that line without losing the genetic line and not be pushing her so hard to be in a production mode. In one of our production apiaries. We just find that it then allows us to retain that genetic material for the daughter queens that we ideally want.
Great question. Bonnie says, excited about the Queen School and being able to access this online from here in Canada. Would you be able to recap what we will cover in the following 2 sessions? For online, I assume, yeah.
Yeah.
So. Okay.
Yeah, so yes.
Yeah.
Next session, we are going to have our friend Elise from ABCBs and one of her queen rearing mentors. And they are going to come on and talk about a collaborative queen production program that they have up in Canada in the BC area. And they are going to talk about how they raise queens together, what their practices are, how they're collaborating, and then how they're actually like holding the customers accountable to taking on those genetics. I really admire Elise and the work that she does with customer education and really making sure that people feel confident and competent in taking their bees and that they can get those bees through the winter and be successful with them. I don't think that we have a similar model in the Northeast or in the US. And I want her and her mentor to be able to share that model with us. So it's called the Community Hive Model. So they'll be sharing both the practice for queen rearing as well as that model with us in the March session. And then Taka Seville from Taka Bee is going to come in and share her methods for sustainable queen rearing in her production apiary. Taka is also a migratory queen producer who lives and works in New York and Florida. She's got slightly different practices and procedures than us. And so we want to make sure that we're able to highlight another queen producer who's doing something similar. So those will be our 2 sessions upcoming. And then we'll have the hands-on sessions this summer. All right. So I don't see any hands. I'm going to give just one more minute and then I think we're going to call it a wrap. Thank you so much, everyone that came. Thanks for
we appreciate you
being here. Thanks for witnessing. And we look forward to seeing you at the future sessions. If you signed up for this session, you actually don't have to sign up for the other sessions. You'll get an email from us with the Zoom link from our newsletter before each session, so no need to re-sign. Hope y'all have a great evening.
If you didn't get a chance to fill out the evaluation, please do. We'll still get the information, and that would be much appreciated.
All right, y'all. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.